All right, 10-minute snack. Everyone knows the rules. Let's eat. Hey, it's Kevin, and I did a raw milk experiment over the last month. I want to tell you a little bit about the experiment, what happened, and you can decide for yourself if it's something that maybe you want to try, maybe not. So first, I'd like to start with why I decided to try raw milk in the first place. And over the last 5-6 years, since I've been doing mostly a carnivore diet, I've experimented with a lot of different kinds of carnivore diets. Everything from muscle meat only to testing in organs to seafood to eggs and testing these things in and out to see how I feel. But I had not tested really milk or dairy at all. And so I wanted to test it in for a number of reasons. So the first thing is dairy to me is considered one of these gray area foods that can potentially work great for some people and not other people. And there's a lot of nuance with dairy, such as raw versus pasteurized, A1 versus A2. Is it a lactose issue, a casein issue? So there's a lot of potential issues that people can have that are different. And maybe they do fine with butter, but not so fine with, let's just say, a casein protein, for example, or lactose, for example. So there is a lot of nuance. And the point of this video is not to cover that. I have written extensively about dairy in an article I'll link below if you want to go into the nuance, and I recommend going through that article if you're going to test in dairy to see if it might be a good fit for you. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to talk about the experiment, what happened, how I did it, and go from there. Okay, so and lastly, I did want to mention, I got my notes right here. One of the other reasons I wanted to experiment with dairy is I am asked about it all the time, and I wrote this detailed article from research I did, but I've not been able to speak from experience. And so I like to be able to speak from personal experience. So that was another reason why I decided to test with it. So let's dive into the experiment. What did I experiment with? How did I organize this experimental design? So I was experimenting with raw A2 grass-fed, non-homogenized milk from a local farm that keeps their cow on pasture. Okay, so that was kind of my gold standard raw milk that I was going to be testing. And in week 1, I was going to drink a half gallon. So, and I was just going to, all I did was, drink that throughout the week. Week 2, I upped the ante to 1 gallon that week. Week 3, I did 1.5 gallons. And the plan was to continue to just add a half gallon of milk every week. But I was starting to get a little bit bored because I'll get to it. But in weeks 1 through 3, I was feeling great, nothing exciting. So in week 4, I decided to up the challenge by doing a raw milk gallon challenge on a single day. So in week 4, one of the days I did just an entire gallon of raw milk with no other food that day. And then week 5, for the sake of science, I tested in various kinds of conventional milk. And when I say conventional, I mean it's pasteurized and homogenized. And I tested different fat contents, everything from skim milk, 2% full fat, half and half, heavy cream, as well as goat's milk. So I can compare goat's milk to dairy milk. So that's what I did during week 5. So let's get to the results. What happened? So, like I told you already, kind of ruined part of the surprise. Weeks 1 to 3, everything was totally just fine. I didn't notice anything good or bad, nothing out of the ordinary. I was digesting it just fine, feeling just fine. So, nothing of note there. Now, week 4 was the gallon challenge, and I was particularly interested to see how this was going to affect my GI, how I was going to be able to handle that amount of lactose, as well as I was curious about the satiety. Because one of the reasons people avoid dairy, one of many reasons, but one of the reasons is it tends to be easy for certain people to overconsume it. So if fat loss is a goal, and I would agree, it's probably not a great idea to drink your calories if that's a main goal. But it's easy for some people to overdo dairy, and it can be addicting. And a little bit of milk turns into a lot of bit of milk. A little bit of cheese turns into a lot of bit of cheese. So I was interested about the satiety of just a gallon of milk over the course of a day. And so the big surprise was there was no real big surprise, nothing too exciting to report, except for the one surprise from the gallon challenge. And that was that I found it extremely satisfying. And satisfying is not the right word, but I should say satiating, meaning it was harder for me to drink a full gallon of milk than I anticipated. So for example, a gallon of raw milk is roughly 2,400 calories, which is probably below my daily average baseline. So I kind of anticipated I would be a little bit hungry by the end of the day. However, it was just the opposite. I was like satisfied all day. I was drinking the milk. Not like I didn't need to force it down, but I was full, and it's not like I was like hungry to eat. So I'm curious, if that would continue on, if I continue to drink just heavy amounts of milk. But from this short experiment, I would say it would not be easy for me to just wildly overdo milk consumption to the point of putting on like a significant amount of fat. So that was the big surprise. Not really that surprising. I think the biggest surprise is that there wasn't a surprise. Like I was able to handle that amount of lactose from not consuming not only dairy like recently, but like throughout my entire life, I have not consumed much dairy. So there's something to say about, one of the reasons I went for raw milk was the microbes can help handle the lactose. And these microbes tend to be killed during the pasteurization process, which makes it harder to handle lactose for people that are more lactose intolerant. And I go into more of that in the article that I'll link below. But that's perhaps one of the reasons why the lactose was non-problematic for me. And so that was the surprise of that. Now let's talk about week 5. This is the conventional milks where I tested in the pasteurized, homogenized milks with different levels of fat. And again, the experiment was exceedingly boring. There were no real surprises. Besides the one surprise, it was like, I think my first time ever drinking goat's milk. And the taste was I didn't like it as much as cow's milk. So that is the one surprise. It wasn't bad or anything, but it had a different aftertaste, which I was not expecting. But overall, how I felt and everything, there was no real surprises. So what does this mean? Let's kind of get to like the point of this. Does this mean I can just, drink all the dairy I want? Well, a concept that I wanted to bring up, and one of the most important concepts when testing in food when it comes to nutrition, is this idea of false negatives, meaning I didn't have any bad response, right? So, but some people take that to think like, oh, that's totally fine. So an example of false negatives, which is kind of the rule, not the exception, is like you go eat a donut and you feel great, you feel fine, you had no digestive problems. That means it's fine to eat all the donuts you want? No, not necessarily. So even though I felt totally fine with dairy, doesn't necessarily mean it's something I can or should keep in long term. And I'll tell you about how I'm going to handle this moving forward. But I wanted to bring up these false negatives because they are common when reintroducing food. And you can say, hey, I feel totally fine, when really it's not fine. On the flip side, there's false positives. And these are something else to be aware of. So let's say I design the experiment slightly differently, and I went straight in with the gallon challenge, and I felt I had GI distress, and I could have easily concluded that, oh my goodness, raw milk is not for me, right? But really, I just overloaded the system before it could up ramp the certain enzymes like lactase that is required to process lactose, for example. So we have this idea of false negatives and false positives, and it's important to keep these two things in mind if and when you're testing in foods for food tolerance, because I could have easily made a false conclusion either way. So how do we deal with these false conclusions? And that's what I want to bring up here to conclude this. Is one is the dose, the frequency, and the duration make the poison. So how much you're consuming, how often you're consuming it, and for how long. So I think of the dose like, okay, 1 gallon of milk, that was the dose. And let's say I do that every single day. That would be the frequency. And let's say I do it every single day for 10 years. That's kind of like the duration. We need to consider all these things when we, think about, is this a food that's okay to include on an ongoing basis or not? How much, etc. Okay, so what's next? Well, I will likely do with raw milk what I do whenever I test in foods to kind of test for if they're okay. And that is to continually test in and out and assess any correlations. So, for example, I will probably bring in raw milk for, extended period of time, take it out, see if there's any difference. Bring it back in, different quantities, different amounts, different durations, right? Different dose, frequency, durations to see if any correlations arise. But that is kind of, my path forward. Again, there's a lot of nuance when it comes to dairy. I do think most people are better off without dairy or limiting dairy, but some people really can just thrive by adding it to their diet. So if it's something you want to experiment with, one, I would first read the article that I'll link below that talks a lot about the nuance between the things I was talking about here, like raw versus pasteurized, A1 versus A2, people that have issues with lactose, for example, but they're able to do fine with butter or cheese, or fermented dairy that have lower amounts of lactose. So there's a lot of things to consider. So I hope you found this interesting. And if you do experiment with raw milk, let me know how it goes. See you next time. Snack time's over. Did you enjoy the snack? If so, drop me a comment. Let me know if we should dive deeper and do a full meal on this topic. Also, P.S. if you liked the snacks, you're gonna love our bites. A daily email bite, a golden nugget, better than a pasture-raised egg yolk. All right, maybe not that good, but it is a daily bite to optimize your health and nutrition with a meat-based diet. Access right now is totally free. Link below. See you in the bites.